For those of you that have not read, the main character is a gentleman who actually quit EDF over policy differences. And despite that, you are not going to see any fisticuffs this afternoon between Britt and Michael. So we're going to have a very civil conversation.
Speaking pretty quickly there.
Yeah. Who knows? Who knows? In fact, when we read Michael's book, we were amazed to realize that we're aligned on most of the big goals in the book. We may have some differences of opinion around the edges of how we achieve those goals, and we'll talk a little bit about that today. You'll hear some things from Britt that may surprise you coming from an environmentalist. And you'll hear Michael say some things about agriculture you might not expect of someone who's been a very vocal critic of polluting industries. So let's jump in. And Michael, in your book recently, We Are Eating the Earth, which is a fascinating read. If you haven't read it, I encourage you to jump right in. What do you mean when you say that agriculture and the food systems are eating the earth? How does our food affect the planet?
Well, agriculture is really our biggest environmental problem. It uses 70% of our fresh water. It's the biggest source of water pollution, right? The dead zone in the Gulf of Mexico, that's from fertilizer running off from the Mississippi Valley. It's the leading cause of deforestation, wetland destruction. But the main thing is that it's literally eating the earth, right? Cities and suburbs are now about 1% of the land on this planet. Farms and pastures are about 40%. Right? When you take a cross-country flight, you look out the window and see all those rectangles and circles, and you can see like there's a lot of agriculture out there. But there is a lot of agriculture out there. Really, our natural planet is becoming an agricultural planet. We're losing a soccer field worth of tropical forest to agriculture every 6 seconds. And that's a climate problem as well. The food system is responsible for about a third of our emissions. And it's mostly because we're just, we're tearing down nature to create farmland. It's, I always say that, trying to decarbonize the planet while you're continuing to tear down forests for agriculture, it's like trying to clean your house while smashing the vacuum cleaner to bits in the living room.
That's not going to work.
You're making a huge mess, right? Because forests store all this carbon, but you're also crippling your ability to clean up the mess because forests also absorb carbon from the atmosphere through photosynthesis. So basically, it's a very big deal that doesn't get talked about very much.
And Britt, do you want to add anything?
Well, I largely agree. Obviously, the facts are the facts in terms of how much land is being used for agriculture, how much of the water is being used for agriculture. We need to absolutely stop deforestation. We need to stop the conversion of peatlands for any land use reason. And if agriculture is one of them, we need to obviously. We need to stop that where we can, and so we need to continue on being more productive on the land we have already converted, and we need to also ensure that the food that we are producing is not wasted. And that's one of the things that is so, almost morally repugnant if you think about it. Like 70% of the water is used to grow food, and then we throw half of it out. It is really a huge problem. So a lot of people are talking about how much more land we need to feed the world in the future. But there are things we can do. We can grow more food on the same amount of land, and we can waste less of the food that we're already growing.
Thank you for those perspectives. I think most people, when they think of farms, think, all goodness, natural, wholesome, bounty. And so can you guys shed some light on what you both feel is the biggest misconception the average person has about agriculture and subsequently the grocery store and how they're procuring their own food? And we'll go in reverse order this time. Britt, let's start with you.
Sure. We're here at Climate Week, so I'll just talk about climate impacts for a second. So if we're really just looking at climate impacts, and this is a problem, obviously, we need to look at more metric than one. But if you really look at climate impacts, then your grass-fed beef is actually worse than other beef for the climate. Your organic food is worse for the climate just because of the mere amount of land it uses. Obviously, there's many reasons why we want to go that way. There are animal welfare reasons. There are sort of reduction of pesticide use. There's many, many reasons why you want to do it. But purely on a sort of a climate standpoint, some of the things that we think are better for the Earth, especially for climate, are actually not. And that's a very big misconception I often have when I'm talking about this with friends who are just coming around for dinner and like, oh, but I do this and I do this, and I have to grovel and I'm like, oh, sorry, that's actually worse. But yeah.
Yeah, no, that was, I think one misperception is that this has no impact on the climate, right? You've seen Elon Musk tweet about that. Joe Rogan talks about that, right? You heard the president at the UN yesterday saying like, they want to kill all the cows or whatever it was he said. So yes, it does have an impact. But I think that's exactly right, that people think that there's kind of, there's sort of good, wholesome, save the climate farming, because, I mean, he's a great writer, but people have read too much Michael Pollan. And so they have this notion that
eat food, mostly vegetables, not too
much. That part's good. Yeah. That part's good, but it's more, this idea that the environmental catastrophe of agriculture was the transformation of these kind of nice, bucolic, rustic farms where, the farmers wore overalls and the animals had names instead of numbers, and they were very diverse crops and the soil was treated with love. And then the kind of intensification of those farms into these sort of evil, bad industrial farms that are, monocultures drenched in chemicals, and they're horrible factory farms, industrial, that was the real kind of environmental tragedy. And like, don't get me wrong, there are problems with industrial agriculture, right? They treat animals badly, treat people badly, their politics suck. They use too many antibiotics. There's a lot not to like, but they also produce a lot of food. Factories are good at manufacturing a lot of stuff, and agriculture's big job over the next 30 years is going to be to produce more food than it has produced in the last 12,000. It turns out that the real environmental tragedy of agriculture was the transformation of nature into those nice Michael Pollan farms. That's when you lost the biodiversity. That's when you lost the carbon. And so when you hear about these, organic, regenerative, kinder and gentler agriculture, if it makes less food per acre, it needs more acres to make the same amount of food. It eats more of the earth. And that is really the problem right now. It's not pesticides or GMOs or, what's happening to the microbiome. You can look at all those things. But the problem is that agriculture is taking over the earth.
It sounds very significant, the way that you just articulated that. Britt, did you want to add a little something there?
Yeah, just like a sort of small nuance. While I agree with Michael that, obviously...
Here we go.
The land conversion bit is huge, right? We do not want to, especially tropical forests, we need to not touch them. And, if we grow less food in sort of even a Western country like Europe or the US, most food in the world are commodities, and it doesn't really matter where it's get grown. And you can make an argument that if you stop growing it in one country, it will have to be grown in another country. And that's why Indonesia and Brazil are deforesting. So absolutely with you on that one. And we need to find this middle way where we can also have high productivity with low pesticide use, low fertilizer use, and that's where technology will probably come in, right? We need to do more with less. We need to do both, and I'm an optimist. I think we can do both.
Yeah, and I want to get into the technology issue a little bit because there are some innovative things happening. Michael, I think you had said just earlier when we were talking, humans might not be great at being nice to each other, and getting in a room and having a civil discourse to solve some challenges, but they're certainly brilliant at inventing things. So let's talk about some of the inventions, technology or otherwise. I'd love to understand what you both feel are the two most impactful things that need to happen to solve this challenge.
Sure. Well, I mean, the short answer to what needs to happen is that, on the demand side, we need to, eat food that uses less land. And sort of the two main levers there are eat less meat, particularly less beef, because beef uses 10 times as much land and 10 times the emissions of chicken or pork, right? Cattle really are the baddies. and then you could also waste less food would be the other demands, which Britt also mentioned, right? Because we waste about a quarter of our food worldwide, which means we use a landmass the size of China to grow garbage, and that's dumb. We should not do that. And it turns out there are a lot of technologies, the most obvious being these sort of alternative proteins on the meat side. Fake meat, whether it's made of plants or grown from animal cells or made from mycelium. People are talking about it like that was a fad that failed. But the fact is, it was kind of a great technological achievement to make meat out of plants that tasted about 90% as good and cost only maybe 40% more than real meat. But there was no kind of use case for that unless you're like me and you're writing a book about food and the climate. What we need is food that is, meat alternatives that taste as good and are as cheap. And I think, the cow is a pretty mature technology. This stuff will continue to get better. So I'm pretty optimistic about that. But then on the supply side, as Britt also mentioned, we need to make more food with less land and less mess. And, in my reporting, I've like dozens of really exciting, promising solutions, from alternative pesticides that literally use the mRNA technology behind the COVID vaccines to constipate potato beetles to death, to alternative fertilizers where they're gene editing microbes to snatch nitrogen out of the air and feed it to crops so you don't have to bomb these fields with chemicals. I went to the University of Illinois where they are literally reinventing photosynthesis. Right? A technology that's been doing a pretty good job maintaining all life on Earth for the last 3 billion years, but turns out to be really inefficient. And they are using AI and gene editing and big data to essentially engineer away some of those inefficiencies to increase crop yields 50% over the next 20 years. So look, like none of these solutions really have a lot of traction yet. We haven't made a lot of progress, unlike the energy and climate problem where, you see solar and wind and electric vehicles and batteries really taking off. We're not there yet on food, but, food's like 20 years behind, and I think we can get there.
Great. Britt?
There's many things, and most of them come around to the idea of, higher production at lower environmental footprint, including land, but also water use, pesticides, fertilizer, like you alluded to. A lot of exciting things there that can happen. Also in terms of the waste, how sort of ensure produce doesn't spoil as quickly, etc. I'm also really excited, though, about livestock. I know they're like the baddie in terms of land use, but there is a lot of efficiency improvements still possible. If you look at, a cow in the Netherlands or California, it'll produce milk at a rate like 6 times to 10 times as high as the cows in India. So if we help the global south primarily with improving their productivity, they will be able to produce a lot more without extra cattle head, which is huge. So I'm very excited about things that we can do there, and it includes just feeding animals better, new vaccines, stuff like that. And then I'm also really excited about certain crops. So one of the things we haven't spoken about yet is, yes, we're going to have to grow more food because there'll be more people, but also, climate change is already happening. And so we're seeing crop devastation already. We're seeing droughts, water shortages from California to Spain and around the world. And yet, yesterday I saw that 2 crops are going to have record yields this year, and it's soy and corn. And the others are all down. And the reason is that there's been huge amounts of R&D investment in soy and corn, in the genetic diversity, so that these crops can be adaptive to the new climate reality. And we need to have the same kind of R&D investment in the other crops as well, because otherwise we'll not only not be able to grow more, we'll see huge crop losses.
Can I just jump in? Because I'm glad you mentioned livestock efficiency. Since I'm already kind of the skunk at the garden party, trashing all these nice Michael Pollan farms, I should say that when I went to Brazil to look at cattle ranching there. And look, if you care, just like what was Willie Sutton's line about, why he robbed banks, because that's where the money is. If you care about emissions and reducing emissions, you got to care about cattle, because that's where the emissions are. And so I went down to Brazil and I saw these, I saw these incredibly productive ranches where they would have basically 1 cow per acre, while their neighbors would have 1 cow per 5, 8, 10 acres. Terribly degraded, and the cows all looked like they were on hunger strikes. It was really messed up. But these ranches, they're doing a lot of stuff that Michael Pollan would love. They're doing the rotational grazing. They're letting their cattle also graze their cover crops, which is a regenerative practice. They are doing no-till farming, but they're not doing it. I mean, the farmers I met, these guys had not read Michael Pollan. They were not environmentalists. They were doing it because they got kick-ass yields. Now, look, they also had feedlots that Michael Pollan would hate. They fertilized their pastures. But look, if they were, if they're 5, 8, 10 times as productive as their neighbors, they're using 1/5, 1/8, 1/10 as much of the Amazon. And so I really think there are huge opportunities on hundreds of millions of acres of degraded land, and particularly in South America, to really improve. And that's probably where we can move the needle the most in the next 5, 10 years.
That's great. Higher yields, higher incomes lead to, the ancillary climate benefits. It's a win-win-win. We love the triple wins.
The farmers actually like that.
Yeah.
They don't like it when I say eat less beef, but like make beef more productive. They're like, oh yeah.
Well, I'm glad you just said that about eat less beef. That's a brilliant segue, because Britt, you're a vegetarian, which is a personal choice. And Michael, you cut out beef and lamb after realizing their climate impact. And yet neither one of you are leading with the lightning rod issue of asking people to change their diets and to stop eating meat entirely. Can you both share your perspectives on why that is?
Look, like you said, I still eat chicken and pork because they're delicious. We've been eating meat as our ancestors started like 2 million years ago. And there's a lot of science that suggests we sort of evolved to love the taste, right? That's when our brains started getting big to find meat, and our stomachs started getting smaller because we didn't have to digest as much plant. And so it's you find the level of hypocrisy that you're comfortable with, right? I have solar panels, I drive an electric car, but I fly way too much. So I don't think there's really anything to be gained by telling people, and I hear it all the time, like, why aren't you vegan? It's like, because I'm not. I'm sorry.
I don't want to be.
Yeah, and it's, I would probably want to be, but whatever, I'm not. And the world ate 450 million tons of meat last year. And the people who are telling me that the answer to this is simple, just stop, I'm like, that's not really a solution, because I don't really see that happening. Perfect usually isn't on the menu, but better is better than worse. I think... I do tell people to try to do better. Eat a little bit less beef, waste a little less food.
Great. Yeah. Britt?
So changing people's dietary preferences is incredibly hard. The old Greek and Indian cultures already had vegetarian. Pythagoras was like, we all should go vegetarian. Well, guess what? We're in 2025, so many centuries later, and we're not. It's really, really hard to shift people's preferences. In fact, people are going towards more protein now in terms of food sort of fads. So what we are focusing on in our group is to really ensure that when you go into a supermarket, whatever is available there has the lowest environmental impact that it can be, right? So without really kind of... And otherwise, it's personal choices. Yeah, I'm a bunny hugger. I don't eat what I couldn't kill myself, and I could never kill a cow or a pig for that matter. But each to their own. But we do owe it to consumers who are so confused as it is when they go into a supermarket, organic, grass-fed, this, that. What should I do? That everything has a lower environmental footprint. So that's what we're focusing on.
Great. All right, lightning round. One sentence from each of you. We've just shed a lot of light on a lot of things, but I want to leave people with optimism. Why are you optimistic?
Well, when I started writing about climate 20 years ago, there were no alternatives to fossil fuels, right? There was no solar, no wind. There's a movie had just come out called Who Killed the Electric Car? There were no batteries. And 20 years later, we're having a clean energy revolution. So the fact that we've made no progress on food, I just say,
we will.
Yeah, things change.
Yeah, so I feel the same. I worked on energy policy and climate policy before, and agriculture was always just the forgotten, the final frontier, too hard. We're really focusing on it now. There is so many events on food here at Climate Week, and so I'm pretty optimistic that everybody putting their head together, we can find some real solutions that will be triple wins for farmers and consumers alike.
Great. Well, with the two of you at the helm of working on this issue, I also feel very optimistic. So thanks so much, and onward.
Thank you, Amy.
Thanks.